All right, let's jump right in. We're going to tackle a question that, it literally affects every single breath we take. When pollution gets pumped into the air, where does it actually go? I mean, think about it. Every single day, you've got factories, cars, all this stuff pumping pollutants into the atmosphere. And it's so easy to just not think about it. But that pollution, it has to go somewhere, right? It doesn't just poof, vanish into thin air.
So yeah, where does it go? That's really the big question we're diving into. How does it travel? How does it spread out? And this is the most important part. How can we actually predict where it's going to end up? Because that's how we figure out its impact on our health and on the whole environment. And look, figuring this out isn't just some, nerdy science project. It's a huge deal. Predicting where pollution is headed is absolutely critical for public health. It's how authorities can give us a heads up, issue air quality warnings, and it's what helps governments create the rules that, actually keep our air clean and safe to breathe.
So, how do they do it? Well, scientists have these incredible tools called air quality models. And honestly, the best way to think about them is like a weather forecast, but for pollution. They're basically using a whole bunch of math to simulate what happens to a pollutant from the moment it leaves the source.
Okay, so how do these models actually work? Let's get into it. We're going to start with a classic, really fundamental example, modeling a plume of smoke coming from a single smokestack.
So you can see it right here. Smoke leaves a smokestack, the wind catches it, and it immediately starts to spread out, to disperse. Scientists have a name for this flowing, drifting cloud of pollution. They call it a plume. And the whole goal here is to use math to describe exactly how that plume is going to move and change as it travels. The specific model they use for this is called the point source Gaussian Plume Model. Okay, I know. Gaussian sounds super technical and complicated, but I promise the idea behind it is actually really simple, really intuitive. We're going to break it all down. So, a Gaussian distribution, it's just a fancy term for that classic bell curve shape you probably learned about in school. It's a pattern you see everywhere. The idea is super simple. You get a whole bunch of stuff clustered in the middle, and then it gets thinner and thinner as you move out to the edges. Think about a crowd leaving a concert or a stadium. Everyone's packed together right at the exit, and then they spread out more and more as they get further away. That's a Gaussian distribution. And believe it or not, that is exactly how a smoke plume behaves. If you could slice right through the plume and look at a cross-section, you'd see the pollution is most concentrated right in the middle, along that center line. Then, as you move away from the center, up, down, left, or right, it just fades out. It follows that exact same bell curve shape. Okay, so to make all the math work out nicely, scientists have to start with a few simplifying assumptions. You can kind of think of them as the rules of the game for the model. It's like setting up a perfect, ideal world scenario to start with. So what are these rules? Well, the model assumes a few things. First, that the factory is pumping out pollution at a steady, constant rate. Second, that the wind is blowing nice and steady, all in one direction, no gusting, no swirling. It also assumes the ground is perfectly flat, no hills or big buildings to get in the way. And finally, that the pollutant itself isn't changing or, raining out of the plume. Now, obviously, the real world is way messier than that, but this gives scientists a really powerful starting point.
Right, so to actually make a prediction, the model needs a few key ingredients. First up is Q, which is the emission rate. That's just how much pollution is coming out of the stack every second. Then you have H, the effective stack height. That's how high up the pollution is released, including how much the hot smoke rises on its own. Next is U. That's just the wind speed. And last, you have these sigma variables, which basically just tell us how much the plume spreads out sideways and up and down.
So once you have all those rules and all those ingredients, you can finally put it all together in an equation. Let's take a look at how this thing works in action.
So don't let the symbols freak you out. Just think of this equation like a recipe. Scientists take all those ingredients we just talked about, the emission rate, Q, the wind speed, U, those spread out factors. They plug them all in, and the equation spits out the answer, C, which is the concentration of the pollutant at any given spot downwind from the stack. Okay, let's dive into this for a second. It's one thing to have all these letters in an equation, but how do you actually find the number for something like Q, the emission rate? I mean, how do scientists know exactly how much pollution a power plant is kicking out? Well, it turns out it's all about some pretty clever calculation. Let's take a coal plant, for example. Engineers start with what they know. How many tons of coal the plant burns every day and what percentage of that coal is sulfur. From there, it's just a few steps. First, they calculate the total amount of sulfur that gets emitted each day. Then they do some unit conversion, turning kilograms per day into the much smaller grams per second. And for the final step, they use a little chemistry to convert the weight of pure sulfur into the weight of the actual pollutant, sulfur dioxide. And boom, just like that, they have their number for Q. And that's really the whole point of all this, isn't it? This isn't just a math problem in a textbook. This is real, practical science that has a direct line to making our world safer. Because here's the thing, once you can understand and predict pollution, you can actually start to manage it. This is what happens when good science helps guide smart policy and engineering. The power to model pollution, that's the absolute first step towards building cleaner, healthier cities for everyone. So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that these seemingly complex models are actually incredibly practical tools. They help engineers design better, safer facilities, and they give governments the hard data they need to create policies that actually work, policies that protect the very air that we all share.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? We're using math and science to see and predict something that's basically invisible to the naked eye, which kind of leaves you with one big final question. If we can do that, what other huge complex problems, things that seem invisible right now, can science help us finally see and maybe even solve?